Ways you could be asked this is again with data tables, graphs or data tables. So if you look at this, both of these involve foraging behaviors. Okay, and this is particular, what we're looking at here is a crow and a whelk. And so the crow eats the whelk, and the whelk is in a shell. And so the crow has to drop the whelk onto the rocks so that it will break open the shell and it can get to the food. And there is actually an optimal height for the crow to drop the whelk from, where he doesn't have to keep expending energy and dropping it multiple times. Like you can see the crows that drop it from a very low height, their average number of drops is very, very high to get it to break open. So they're expending a significant amount of energy as they continue, as they keep flying, they keep flying, they keep flying. So trying to get the food out. When they go significantly above that 5-meter mark, that kind of ideal mark, then they're wasting too much energy flying too high. Yes, it breaks, but they don't need to expend all that energy. They don't need to fly that high to break it open. So they're using too much energy to try to break it open. You could also look at the data table to see that. You could again look for the optimal height, okay, which is going to be somewhere around here, where my cost-benefit analysis here is the lowest. Okay, my cost minus my benefit, okay, I want those not to be hugely far apart here. So you can see that your best height would be right around 5 meters. From the data table, you could gather that information as well. So another behavior that natural selection has an influence on is mate selection. Okay, and so most animals are considered promiscuous, so there's no strong bond. There's no pairing bond. That's why when they talk about animals that mate for life, that's usually an exception to the rule, because most of your animals are going to be promiscuous. Some of them may be monogamous, okay, and if you're monogamous, okay, that means you have a 1+1 partnership, 1 male, 1 female. Okay. Some animals are also polygamous. Okay. And there's a couple different kinds of polygamous. Polygamous is that you've got one individual of one particular sex plus multiples or several of the other gender. And so there are 2 types of polygamy, and we've got what's called polygyny as the first one. Okay, and so polygyny is when you've got one male with, multiple, one male with multiple females. Okay, so really struggling here with my pen. So one male plus several females would be polygyny. Gyny is the female part. Okay, remember poly is many. Okay, so you've got many females in this situation. The other form of polygamy would be polyandry. Okay, and so again, we've got many, but this time the and here is the males. Okay, so I've got one female here plus several males. Okay, and so these mate selection can be influenced by natural selection, and mate selection will go hand in hand. Okay, remember, it's all about the ability to pass on the genes. Earlier, we talked about competitive social behaviors. Okay, now we're going to talk about, in general, social behaviors. So we'll real quick review a couple of them. Remember, we already talked about our agnostic social behavior. Okay, remember our agnostic social behavior? That was the more aggressive behavior. There, it involves a contest, okay, usually over resources. Okay, we also talked about with a competitive social behavior, that dominance hierarchy. Remember, with our alpha, possibly a beta organism, one that is, they determine ranking, and then one exerts more control over the others. One we did not talk about before as a social behavior, okay, is territoriality. So territoriality is exactly what it says. Okay, you are defending your area or defending your territory from others. Okay, this is one of those things, kind of like foraging behavior, where there's a cost benefit here that needs to be taken into account. Okay, territoriality requires a great deal of resources. Okay, it requires a large amount of energy to defend the territory, as well as you run the risk of death. Okay? If you get in a fight over your territory, you may lose that fight. Okay? And so when you're using up all that energy, as well as running the risk of death, okay, that end result there is you have decreased your reproductive fitness. And from an evolutionary standpoint, that's no good. Remember, you want to be able to pass your genes on to the next generation. Okay? Some organisms may show territoriality with what's called a spraying behavior. Most of y'all, if you've ever been around a dog or ever in your life taken a dog on a walk, okay, in particular a male dog, you have seen this spraying behavior. Okay? They use it to mark territory. Some kind of, usually it's urine, bears, dogs, cats. Okay? Lots of different kinds of animals will do this to mark their territory. That's actually what's happening in the picture over here. This cheetah is urinating on the tree here, marking its territory. This one is sniffing, okay, to determine if another cheetah has basically already marked that territory. They can also give visual as well as auditory signals to help mark their territory. Okay, robins, that's why the bird with the big red breast, the red chest, that's a visual signal that it's in the area. Auditory signals would be things like gibbon calls or bird songs. Those also let other organisms know. They help mark the territory. So there's, like we mentioned, there was a cost. You run the risk of decreasing your reproductive fitness, obviously with death and the expenditure of the energy. However, there is a benefit in the sense that no other organism is coming in to access your food source, your water source. Okay? You have staked claim on these particular resources. You now have to defend them. Another social behavior we have that is not competitive at all, this is actually a beneficial behavior, okay, is what's called altruism. Altruism is any behavior, okay, that might decrease the individual's fitness, but it's going to increase the fitness of the others around it. The example over here, this organism here is giving a warning cry that a predator is coming. Okay? That behavior is going to benefit the others around it. The other organisms around it, they are going to hear that warning cry. They're going to hide. They're going to run. They're going to hopefully get away from the predator. It decreases this individual's fitness because it has now attracted attention to itself. By making that loud noise, it has attracted attention to itself from the predator. Okay? So another example would be vampire bats. Okay? Vampire bats will actually help feed other vampire bats. So the vampire bats that went out and fed that night may actually regurgitate back some of the food, some of the blood that they ate that night, so that the other bats that weren't able to feed that night can have some food. So it decreases that individual's fitness because it decreases its nutrition, but it increases the fitness of the entire of the community, of the population of vampire bats. Other birds are known to do some altruistic behavior, and they act as helpers to birds that are breeding. So you may have a pair of breeding birds, and the other birds in the population help defend that particular nest and help feed the babies. Monkeys will give warning cries like that organism. And so again, and you notice I keep saying that organism. I think it's a prairie dog. I'm not really sure what that is. Okay, but the monkeys will give cries. And so again, it attracts attention to themselves, but it helps the rest of the troop. Okay, these behaviors are a lot more common in animals that have very complex social structures. Insect colonies see a lot of this. We also have what's called our maximum altruistic behavior. And so our maximum altruistic behavior, this is, the end-all be-all of sacrifice here. Okay? This would be when you have sterile, an example of this would be, bees here. You have sterile worker bees. So they have a zero reproductive fitness, but they devote their entire life to ensuring reproductive success of the queen. Okay, so basically, they have no regard for their individual fitness, and their only concern is for the queen so that reproduction can happen. One of the theories behind why altruism may exist, because as you know, as a general rule, would it be good to decrease your individual fitness, is a theory called kin selection. Okay, and so kin selection is basically the theory that this altruistic behavior is favored because it enhances the reproductive success of related individuals. And that would be important from a genetic standpoint because related individuals usually have genes in common. Okay? And so with kin selection, by doing this altruistic behavior, by doing this behavior that helps ensure the success of others, you are also helping ensure that some of your genes are passed on because you share with your kin genes, some of the same genes. And so it helps, okay, to keep those genes in the gene pool. Okay? And so that's one of the theories behind why these organisms may do this altruistic behavior. Okay? You can see here with these ground squirrels, okay, that females, so over here on your y-axis, you're looking at the distance that they moved away from their natal burrow, so basically where they grew up. Okay, and so females stay a lot closer to home. They exhibit more of that altruistic behavior. They stay, they help raise young close by the home. Males, not as much. Okay, evolutionary-wise, somebody needs to venture out to help get more variation within the population. Okay, but altruistically, okay, if the females stay in the same area, then they're helping keep their genes in the population. Evolutionary-wise, you can get variation from the males moving around. Another example would be food sharing. And so you may have some organisms, for instance, that vampire bat that comes home and shares food with other bats that were unable to feed. Okay? If the organism that's doing the altruistic behavior is being discriminatory with its behavior, is not necessarily sharing food with any bat that didn't get to eat. It's only sharing food with its kin, with bats that it's related to that did not get to eat. Then again, that's going to be evolutionary favorable because these organisms are helping ensure that their genes stay in the population. So let's look at the concept of inclusive fitness then. Okay, so inclusive fitness is the sum of an organism's classical fitness. Its classical fitness being how many of its own offspring it can produce and support. So how many of its own offspring it produces and supports. That's its classical fitness. Okay, so the sum, inclusive fitness is the sum. Okay, so we're adding together its classical fitness, so how many of its offspring it produced and supported, and the number of equivalents of its own offspring you can add to the population by supporting others. So for instance, let's say my inclusive fitness would be my classical fitness, which would be I have 2 offspring that I have produced and are able to support. And then my number of equivalents of my own offspring I can add to the population by supporting others. So let's say we're talking about my family. Okay? I have a sister that has 2 children that I would support, that I can support them. So that would be 2 more that are equivalent of my own offspring that by supporting my sister and her husband, okay, I can also add those to the population. Okay, so that's our inclusive fitness. Basically, this is going to support that cooperative behavior, that helping other people out or other organisms out. You know, that by helping these other organisms out, I can keep these genes in the population. Okay, again, this is very important, more important when the organisms are related to one another with close relatives. you see this because, again, more of those identical genes. If it's from an evolutionary standpoint, if it's all about keeping my genes in the gene pool and I help support my sister's offspring, then I'm keeping some of my genes in the gene pool, which goes right along with that kin selection and the altruism.